Shalom, greetings from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hassan, and this is TV7's Editor's Note. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on a whole variety of issues. The Middle East has not stayed quiet for the period of Christmas, unfortunately, and there are many developments to be discussed, to include, of course, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's highly anticipated meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the residence of the president at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. But before we discuss that, I'd like to raise that we are, during this period, of course, in our Christmas broadcast schedule. The focus during this period of time is also to upgrade our systems. We're going to focus on the quality of the productions, to include the visuals, the audio, the lighting. We have accumulated all of your feedbacks over the period of time and are trying to implement that in a diligent fashion. And of course, all of this also costs funds, and we are in need of your support, since TV7 Israel is a donation-based ministry organization that operates from Jerusalem. So if you're blessed by our productions and would like to help us develop as well as sustain what we are doing on a regular basis, from the guests that we invite to the studios all the way to the staff and other aspects of what we do, your support will go a long way. You can donate to our through our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. In the United States, we of course have Truth for the Nation supporting our endeavors here at TV7 Israel with a 501c3, so it's tax deductible to our American viewers, and we would like to encourage you to support us. So once again, you can support with a donation via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Now, in today's discussion, we're going once again to focus on President Trump's anticipated meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, during the course of which they'll discuss the Iranian question and the Gaza situation, the Lebanese situation, the situation vis-a-vis Syria, where there is also heightened tensions currently between Turkey and Israel. But before all that, let's introduce our expert for today, Dr. Nir Boms, who is the director of the Forum for Regional Cooperation at Tel Aviv University. It's great to have you with us, Nir.
Good to be here.
And I'd like to start, of course, with the meeting today between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump. There's a whole host of issues, obviously, that they are discussing and are having on their plates, not just between the United States and Israel, but of course also on a regional scale, on a global scale. At an age of strategic power competition, there are plenty of issues that need to be dealt with that have also consequential implications for other regions. And as such, the first and most important topic that I'd like you to touch on is the Gaza Strip. Obviously, the 20-point plan of President Trump has yet to transition from phase 1 to phase 2. We still have one hostage in Hamas captivity so many days and months and years after the atrocities committed by this Palestinian terror group on October 7th of 2023. But what do you think is the key components, or compartmentalize for us the discussion, so to speak, on how to deal with this very complicated issue?
Well, President Trump announced that January will be the turning point from phase 1 to phase 2 of the plan, and I believe that he would very much like to announce it. The president also announced that the war is over, and in some ways it did, and in other ways it didn't. And I believe that he will announce that there's going to be a transition to phase 2. Infrastructure is here. There is a new place in Kiryat Gat, not so far away from Gaza. 35 countries are already represented. A lot of work is being done toward phase 2. And I think the zoom in is how this phase 2 is going to look like. Are we going to have a peace force that is actually going to take place, take the place of the IDF and disarm Hamas and complete that? Most probably not. Are we going to have a professional government led by some names like Tony Blair or Nikolai Mladenov that were thrown into the plate that will begin in January their office and begin to control Gaza? Well, we're not sure if we're going to see that as well. But since at this point the Gaza Strip is split between the area where the IDF controls and the area where Hamas still is in control, there's certainly a way to begin phase two. Maybe not in the entire Gaza Strip, but certainly in the area where the IDF holds more control and where you can act more freely. And in some ways, I think that the framework that we may see is that it may take a bit more time until Hamas will actually be disarmed and will actually be dismantled. And there may be a way to create a beginning of an implementation of phase two, at least in some of the Gaza Strip, and perhaps eventually create a long-term competition between the areas in control by the phase two of the peace plan and the area in control by Hamas, making it clear that the people who are going to be in the area controlled at this point by the IDF and under phase two, perhaps in a different configuration, are going to start seeing reconstruction. And in the area controlled under Hamas, they will get Hamas. And at some point, some of the people inside may be able to say, well, perhaps we can push this further. And that may be the way to get Hamas out, unless, of course, that's probably going to be discussed as well. If we're not going to take them out and we don't have volunteers, we need to understand what are the ramifications. We still have a little bit of fighting, and perhaps if Hamas needs to leave and they're not going to do it on their own, perhaps Israel or the IDF needs to push a little further.
Can Israel capitulate at this point?
I don't think Israel will capitulate, not after this, over 2 years. But I don't think there is a big enthusiasm to start another military campaign. Hamas does not have the capacities it had. There's limits for what Hamas can cause in terms of actual threat. Hamas is now surrounded by the IDF inside Gaza and outside of Gaza. It's a different set of circumstances. But we also understand that we need to move with Gaza because that's not the most urgent issue. You started with Gaza, but I believe that prime ministers will actually start with Iran.
Let's then touch on Iran, and actually a derivative of Iran. The October 10th arrangement for Gaza, when President Trump announced the 20-point plan, aimed to bring about, as you mentioned, the declaration of peace in the Middle East, peace and prosperity, and that everybody would at some point huddle around some campfire and chant Kumbaya. We both know it's not the case. The Iranian proxy Hezbollah is refusing to disarm, very much at the encouragement of the Ayatollah regime in Tehran. And this may cause friction once more. I mean, the arrangement struck on the 27th of November of 24 is faltering. And it's reaching a point where we might see a re-engagement of hostilities on the Lebanese front, no less.
Well, that is true. But at the same token, it's also important to note that Hezbollah, similarly to Hamas, it also was weakened. And in another related point, the disarmament of Hezbollah, well, again, it's not going to happen voluntarily, but the Lebanese forces today probably have done more than in any other point in history. And this is actually a point of a break. Hezbollah and their patrons very much understand that if they're not going to be able to push back, they eventually are the ones who may be pushed. In order to implement this ceasefire, and perhaps gradually, the Lebanese have done what they could. They could not do everything, and the IDF was sometimes asked to help. In some conversations with Lebanese, of course, these are not Lebanese who support Hezbollah, but these are Lebanese who support Lebanon. They would even tell us quietly, please continue. We want you to bomb. Because we understand that it's not going to be done so quickly. But again, the Lebanese army by itself, there's discussions about how much of it, because of some of the Shia component, and how much of it is.
I mean, the majority of the Lebanese armed forces are Shias.
And therefore, when you have the Lebanese army asked to dismantle Hezbollah, and sometimes you ask people to dismantle infrastructure related to their own families, it's not so easy. And nobody assumes this is easy, or that they will do it again willingly, or they would not need some help. But there is a push, and part of that relates to the elections in May that may be postponed, and whether there's going to be a scenario in where Hezbollah will weaken also politically. But eventually there is a principle here, a principle that actually applies in Gaza and in Lebanon, and in another way in Syria as well, but in a bit of a different interpretation. Is make sure that states become states again. If anyone has a dream that gets closer, at least a step further to your kumbaya analysis, if you want to have a Palestinian polity at some point in place, and lots of issues with there, we don't have the leadership, etc., the Palestinian Authority barely functions, but even put this aside, you won't be able to do that once you have a group that is really a proxy and that seeks to do something very different. They don't seek a state. The same with Hezbollah. Hezbollah does not have a Lebanese agenda. Hezbollah have an Iranian agenda, and a lot of their agenda is, again, another state happens to be our country of Israel. It's very clear that if you want to make Lebanon again, you need a state. And if you need a state, you need to make sure that non-state actors are going to be fiercely, as far as possible, from the centers of power, if you want to be able to eliminate them completely. The same for Hamas, the same for Hezbollah, and the same from the other non-state actors and proxies in Syria. It's very clear that the stronger you have all these non-state players, and that's why they're called non-state actors, because they're intervening in the attempt to create a state, a stable state, and hopefully a more moderate and pragmatic state that will agree that at some point we need to create some stability that will lead to some degrees of peace and prosperity, if not to singing Kumbaya together once upon a time.
It's a fascinating topic, and I'd like to expand on that, since Syria is very relevant in this context. When we look at Israel's northern neighbor, on the one hand you have Lebanon, of course, and then just next to that, Syria. The Syrian state is a failed state at this point. It's not a cohesive body that operates as one in the context of domestic or foreign relations. And despite the Trump administration's attempts to really normalize the Damascus regime under Ahmed al-Shara, together with the Turks and the Saudis and the Qataris, it's quite evident that Ahmed al-Shara is the governor of just a couple of districts, be it from Idlib all the way to Rif Dimashq or Hama, Aleppo. And then within that context, their efforts to consolidate power over all of Syria is failing. But it's not only failing in the sense of a negotiated solution to reach a certain deal that usually is aiming to find something of a cohesive approach, at least from the minority perspective, to try and ask Damascus, okay, you're jihadists, we're not. You're Wahhabists or Islamists, we're not. We would like to preserve our way of life, and that is something that they cannot agree to because of the radical elements within their own groups, be it Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or the others that are currently leading the Damascus regime, former Al-Qaeda, Islamic State. And then within all of that context, you have a reality where the state of Syria, supposedly, as it's being sold abroad, it's a balanced approach or a pragmatic approach that, on the one hand, is true to the leader, specifically Ahmed al-Shara, who stands to gain quite significantly if this project succeeds, but there is no true institution being built here. And every time you see the Syrian institutions or security forces, defense ministry, foreign ministry, and others um, failing in abiding by the rules that have been dictated by the United States and others, immediately it's the distancing of saying, no, the institution is the problem. We do not control those institutions yet, and we are the solution, so give us another chance. And it keeps being repeated time and time again. At what point can we say, okay, this project had failed and is failing? The Kurds are not willing to join. The Alawites are not willing. The Christians and the Druze are all saying, we are being persecuted here. When will somebody wake up?
Well, the Syrian state, since it was founded in the first 9 years since 1946, it saw 10 military coups. So the context of failed state is not necessarily foreign to Syria, as it is not foreign to the Middle East. Syria had seen a significant period of stability under Hafid and Bashar al-Assad. And that stability came also in a price, not just a price that eventually the Syrians and the Assads themselves have paid because of the rebellion against them, but also because this state that was led by one of the smaller minority groups in Syria, and by the way, with an alliance of the other minorities, was aligning itself with some of the most radical players. And in some ways, it did something that very few countries in the Middle East even could do, is to host Iran and Shia extremists on the one hand, and have the offices and the headquarters of all the Sunni terrorist groups as well, living happily ever after United Nations of Terrorism, and that was under the stability part. And I don't think we're sad that there's been a transition in Syria and that it had some positive ramifications, certainly when it comes to the Iranian case. But exactly as you've said, stability is still far from Syria today. 40% of Syrians today are minorities, and the vision that was sold by President Bashar since he came to office was, well, I'm going to create a new Syria. And this Syria is going to create a different alliance of minorities, with power sharing, with women's rights, with minority rights. And what we've seen is so far that in all of these categories, it's a failed grade. And a failed grade also leads to a failed state. When we will wake up, I think some of this awakening is already happening. This is also why Israel ended up intervening when it comes to the Druze. There's additional pressures when it comes to the Kurds and other minorities. Show me how a country treats its women and how a country treats its minorities, and eventually you will see how the pragmatic alliance and how the West will treat them. And I think that point is coming. If Syria is not going to be able to come to terms with what it needs to do on these issues, I think the credit that was given to Ashara is soon going to be over. The problem is also, what's the alternative? I'm not sure that there is a great desire to see Syria completely disintegrate and having even more radical factions, and there are more radical factions in Syria, again taking the lead, and then get Syria divided into different forces that eventually rekindle the entire Syrian war, or ethnic and proxy war. And that's partially the push and pull factors. But I think that Mohammed al-Julani, President Bashar, received a certain credit to deliver something in Syria. I think he understands that a lot was not delivered, and that he needs to get part of his act together and begin to deliver. And if not, he probably understands that his credit is over. And there's going to be other policies, beginning with the economic sanctions and also end with actual interventions. He wants a security agreement with Israel. Israel is happy to give security agreement to him if there's going to be arrangements to make sure that some of what we're speaking about now is actually going to be implemented. The same applies for what is happening in the north. And hopefully the Americans will do what is needed to make sure that these interests are kept. And I'm quite convinced that this is also going to be discussed just an hour from now between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
So I'm less of an optimist. I unfortunately, I say this with a heavy heart. I think that countries in the region are already preparing for the day after, and this also goes for Turkey, and this also goes for other countries in the region that are understanding that they were betting on a losing horse. But time will tell how this will evolve. It's not an easy path ahead. And with regard to the Assad regime, it was atrocious, of course, and heinous the way they conducted themselves during the years and decades that they were in rule. But other than the Iranian equation, where we're obviously very happy to see that Iran primarily departed from the majority of Syria these days, I don't see a lot of difference between the current regime and the previous one when it comes to the viciousness in their affairs. And let's not forget that they're still under scrutiny today that the Assad regime was not under back then, because the Assad regime was more than happy to be a vassal state to the Russians. And the Americans obviously have somewhat better standards than the Russians when it comes to human rights, but that's already a different story.
And that may also change following the meetings that we're just recently were taking in Moscow.
Absolutely. Now, in 1 minute, are we on the precipice of war with Iran, or is it a situation in which we should be deeply concerned about where it's heading to?
Iran was the most important issue that faced Israel in the last decades. It has not changed. What has changed, certainly after the 12 days war, is that Iran again was weakened. That was a part of the last part of the cycle following October 7th. But we also understand that Iran, weaker but still determined. They have learned their lessons. They have gotten back to manufacture. They're trying to get additional defense systems that will make it more difficult for Israel to regain the air superiority that it gained during the 12-day war. And of course, missiles. And we've seen reports that Iran is getting back to manufacture them. Some of this is the Iranian attempts to project power. Not all of it, it can happen very, very quickly. But it's very clear that Israel, again, is not going to give up and let Iran be the same threat that it was.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, when we're talking about the Iranians, people need to understand that following Operation Rising Lion, namely the 12-day war between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, which the Iranians essentially launched on the 7th of October of 2023 with its multi-front war via proxies against the State of Israel from the heinous acts and atrocities committed by the Islamist Hamas alongside the Iranian proxy Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other terror-affiliated groups in the Gaza Strip against the southern residents of Israel, murdering some 1,200 civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and of course kidnapping 251 people, the majority of whom have been thus far, praise God, returned to Israel, despite the fact that not all of them amongst the living. We still have one hostage there. The next day, on the 8th of October of 2023, we had the Iranian proxy Hezbollah joining from Lebanon. On the 17th of October, joining in from Yemen, the Houthis, of course. the militias that the Iranians have utilized from Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. All of that ultimately was concentrated into the clash of 12 days between Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, with the United States, of course, joining to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities in a fashion that would really render those installations pretty much irreparable at this point in time. But, within all of this, we see that the Iranians are not stepping down. They're not saying, okay, you know what, we lost this war, we're going to alter our course and figure out a way to live our lives in peace and prosperity, as the President of America keeps calling for, right? They are still poised on seeing the fall of the state of Israel, the fall of the United States of America, and they're actively seeking to do so. And now they're focusing on rehabilitating both their ballistic missile capabilities as well as other capabilities that are being discussed and circulating over the last several days and weeks. And that is something that Israel cannot stand idly by and allow yet again an existential threat to reemerge. So this might result in a very dangerous period ahead. We'll have to wait and see how this evolves from the meeting, from other developments that are expected to take place in the next several days. But with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Nir Boms for all of your insights today. And I'd like to thank also all of our viewers at home, to thank you and to wish you, if we do not get a chance to do so, Happy New Year. And with God's grace, also a peaceful year, a year of prosperity for you, to your family, and to all the people here in Israel, the United States, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, European nations, and elsewhere, that we may see a year of fruitful endeavors to all of us. So from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.